So let's have a start. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Interesting title. And that's all I'm going to say. Martha's voice. So this is what we're hearing. For Christ's sake, hang on a minute, will you? So clearly, there's a sense of frustration and annoyance in that opening line. Okay? And that links into potentially conflict. Potentially, as per the diagram that we did at the beginning. So that was Martha's voice, which we hear obviously from somewhere else. We don't see her. So Honey turns to George. Now this is where so Honey and George are friends. They're not in a relationship together. Should we write down? She's changing. So George is obviously Martha's husband. So the stage direction there, where the way in which he responds is marked as being incredulous. So again, this is again a bit of sense of annoyance and frustration. She's what? She's changing. Questions? Honey, yes. Her clothes. Her dress. George is suspicious. Why? So we're starting to see already that stage direction is really quite key and important in starting to develop this idea, this sense of tension, because it marks the way in which the words are supposed to be projected, and the tone that's supposed to be attached to them, and in this case we've got incredulous and suspicious. So Honey, with a nervous little laugh, again we've got stage direction, there's this sense that she is uncomfortable. And that's obviously in terms of her characterisation. She is made uncomfortable by George's reaction. I'm just going to annotate that in the margin. So what you can see that I'm doing here is I'm actually just I'm selecting what potentially could be quotations that I will use in my analysis, but I'm also marking in my notes as to why I'm selecting those. So obviously it's the stage direction, it's about the tone that George takes, and that tells us something about his characterisation. That one links into the point that I've already made, so I would simply just underline it and draw an arrow up to that annotation. Because remember, we're trying to do this quickly. One of the challenges that we've got is the hour and a half that we've been allocated to do it, so we don't want to be wasting time. So Honey with a nervous little laugh. Now you could mark this as character relationship, this idea that George is creating tension. But what that then makes me think about is that if we go back to the question asks you about the way that dramatic tension is created and exploited in this extract. So what we're looking at is from the perspective of the audience, kind of this sense of tension. And obviously, one of the ways that we will, as a member of the audience, will feel tension will be if we are empathising or sympathising with the person on stage. So here, it's marked that clearly Honey is feeling awkward, and as a member of the audience, we may well empathise with her regarding that awkwardness. So George with a threatening look, characterisation, tells us something about him, but it also tells us something about his relationship with his wife. And quite a few of you actually picked up on this in your responses. This idea that there is an attempt at being controlling and using different strategies in order to do that. Oh, she does she? And then his dialogue. It's thinking about the tone that he uses in his dialogue. And what tone do we have here? Sarcastic. So sarcasm is one of the things that's working towards building this tension through tone. So, Honey, well, heavens, I should think she doesn't get to finish. So we get an interruption. So thinking about the tension between George and Honey, he interrupts her, he cuts her off. You don't know. Again, this is about his characterisation. Nick, as Honey starts, you feel alright. Honey, reassuring, but with the echo of a whine at a long practiced tone. Oh yes, dear, perfectly fine. George, fuming to himself. Again, this is about the annoyance. So this is one of the things that we'd mentioned at the beginning, this idea of potential conflict. There. So she wants to be comfortable, does she? Well, we'll see about that. So Honey then turns to George brightly. I didn't know until just a minute ago that you had a son. George, wheeling as if struck from behind. What? A son? I hadn't known. You to know and me to find out. Well, he must be quite a big 21 tomorrow. Tomorrow's his birthday. Nick with a victorious smile. Well, George turns to Honey. She told you about him. So this is a revelation. Potentially this idea of a secret being exposed. And that's also marked by his wheeling as if struck from behind. So Honey becomes flustered. So then again, this is where, at which point she obviously realises she's been told something that perhaps she shouldn't have. Well, yes, well, I mean, George nailing it down. So she told you about him. Honey, a nervous giggle, yes. George, strangely. You say she's changing. So here we have a change in subject. So George obviously doesn't want to discuss his son and refocuses the conversation. Yes. And she mentioned, Honey, cheerful but a little puzzled. Your son's birthday, yes. More or less to himself. Okay, Martha, okay. You look pale, Honey. Do you want a... Yes, dear, a little more brandy maybe, just a drop. This is to do with the crops that are being used. We know that they're consuming alcohol. And alcohol, very often, can be involved in terms of worsening, enhancing conflict. So if there's this tension, there's this awkwardness in the relationships between people as we're sitting there watching them in the audience, we're thinking, throwing alcohol down is probably not a good idea. So George, okay Martha, may I use the bar? George, oh yes, by all means, drink away. You'll need it as the years go on. For Martha, as if she were in the room. You goddamn destructive. So if we weren't in any doubt before, we now are, that there is a conflict here between this husband and wife. And that's going to be quite an important part of the tension that's created. So just to clarify in my own mind what we've got so far, we've got tension between Honey and George because Honey has been told information that George did not want her or was unaware that she knew. So that's a source of tension. George himself is a source of tension because of the way he responds to people and the manner in which he addresses people. But we've also got the relationship between George and his wife as a source of tension because clearly there's this conflict between them. And I would annotate that on my page. Okay, so these are, at the moment, the three sources of tension that we're seeing.